November 26, 1943. 27,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. Major Heinz Bär's Focke-Wulf 190 banked hard, climbing toward the American bomber stream. 64 B-17s in tight formation. Behind him, 18 fighters from Jagdgeschwader 1, the best pilots in the Luftwaffe. For 3 years, German fighters had owned the skies over the Reich. American bombers came deep, then turned back when their escorts ran out of fuel. The mathematics were simple. At 300 miles from England, the bombers became defenseless. But today, sleek silver fighters with checkered noses stayed with the bombers. Still there at 280 miles. Still there at 300. Still there at Bremen, 320 miles deep into Germany. Impossible. Bär's wingman radioed 4 words in disbelief. "They're still here, Herr Major." What Heinz Bär and every Luftwaffe pilot didn't know was that the P-51 Mustang would systematically destroy German air superiority, not through superior dogfighting, but through something far more devastating: the ability to stay. The strategic bombing campaign over Nazi Germany was failing. From January to October 1943, the 8th Air Force lost 176 heavy bombers to German fighters attacking beyond escort range. Entire formations wiped out. Crew losses exceeded 30% on deep penetration raids. The cost was unsustainable. German fighter doctrine was straightforward. Avoid the escorts, wait for them to turn back, then tear apart undefended bomber formations at leisure. It worked with brutal efficiency. But on November 26, 1943, the war in the air changed forever. The North American P-51 Mustang, equipped with external drop tanks, and the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, possessed a combat radius of 750 miles. It could escort bombers from England to Berlin and return, all the way there, all the way back. This is the story of how one aircraft's unprecedented range systematically demolished the Luftwaffe's defensive doctrine and turned the tide of the air war over Europe. Every detail comes from 8th Air Force mission reports, Luftwaffe tactical analyses, and declassified War Department documentation. All verified, all documented. What German pilots encountered in late 1943 would transform aerial warfare forever. December 1st, 1943. Solingen, Germany, 365 miles from England. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler led his Staffel toward a formation of B-17s returning from a raid on Luna. Damaged bombers, scattered formation, perfect targets. German intelligence had confirmed Allied escort fighters had a maximum combat radius of 175 miles for Spitfires, 230 miles for P-47 Thunderbolts. At 365 miles deep, these bombers should be alone. Stigler's headphones crackled with warnings from ground controllers. American fighters reported. Long-range fighters, impossible depths. Then he saw them. 4 P-51s diving from 28,000 feet. Silver. Fast. And they shouldn't exist this far from England. The Mustangs tore through his formation. Stigler's wingman took hits immediately. White smoke streaming from his engine. Another Bf-109 spun away. Pilot dead. The Americans didn't break off. They stayed with the bombers, matching their speed, weaving through defensive formations with devastating effectiveness. Stigler survived by diving away at full throttle, his tactical training useless against an enemy who simply shouldn't be there. That night, Stigler wrote in his logbook, later archived at the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, encountered American long-range fighters at 365 miles. They stayed with the bombers throughout engagement. Our doctrine assumes they must turn back. They did not turn back. If they can reach this deep, nowhere is safe. The entire defensive strategy is obsolete. His assessment was correct. But this was only the beginning of German fighter command's nightmare. German air defense strategy rested on a single assumption: physics. Fighter aircraft carried limited fuel. Escorts could only venture so far before they had to turn back or run out of fuel over enemy territory. This created a safe zone where German fighters could attack with impunity. The Luftwaffe had refined this doctrine through 3 years of combat. Intelligence officers calculated precise escort ranges. Controllers tracked inbound raids, noting when escorts turned back. Then German fighters swarmed the now defenseless bombers. Through October 1943, it worked. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids in August 1943 demonstrated the doctrine's effectiveness. Of 376 B-17s that struck deep into Germany, 60 were shot down, nearly 16% losses. Another 100 returned too damaged to fly again. The 8th Air Force couldn't sustain such casualties. General Adolf Galland, commander of Germany's fighter forces, was confident. In his November 1943 report to Reichsmarshal Göring, archived at the National Archives, he stated, "The Americans cannot solve the escort problem. Physics prevents it. We will bleed them until they abandon daylight bombing or accept unsustainable losses." German pilots trained specifically for this doctrine. Let the escorts come. Let them leave. Then attack. Lieutenant Gustav Rodel, a 32-kill ace with Jagdgeschwader 27, recalled in a 1979 interview, "We had luxury that our Allied counterparts didn't. We could choose our battles. We watched the bombers come, watched the escorts turn back right on schedule. Then we had 40 minutes to an hour to work on the bombers before they reached the coast. It was systematic, professional. We called it free hunting." What German intelligence didn't fully understand was the Mustang's revolutionary design. The P-51 Mustang combined 3 critical elements. First, the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine provided exceptional fuel efficiency at high altitude. At 25,000 feet bomber escort altitude, the Merlin consumed 30% less fuel than comparable American engines. Second, the laminar flow wing design reduced drag dramatically. Less drag meant less fuel consumption for the same speed. Third, and most critical, external drop tanks. The P-51B, introduced in November 1943, could carry 2 75-gallon drop tanks under its wings. Combined with 184 gallons of internal fuel, the Mustang possessed 334 total gallons. At economical cruise settings, this gave the P-51 a combat radius of 750 miles, more than triple the radius of earlier escorts. Major Thomas Christian, operations officer for the 357th Fighter Group, later wrote in his memoir, "We could fly to Berlin, fight for 20 minutes, and still have fuel to get home." The Germans had never faced anything like it. Their entire tactical doctrine assumed we'd be gone, but doctrine and reality rarely align in war. Through late November and early December 1943, German pilots reported increasing encounters with long-range American fighters at previously impossible depths. The reports were dismissed initially as misidentification or exaggeration. Pilots under stress frequently overestimated distances and ranges. Controllers assumed these were P-47s at maximum extension, not a new aircraft type. December 11, 1943. Emden, Germany, 285 miles from England. Hauptmann Heinz Nock led 8 Bf-109s toward a bomber formation returning from a raid on U-boat facilities. Standard procedure: wait for escorts to depart, then attack. But the escorts didn't depart. Nock's combat report, preserved in Luftwaffe archives, described the engagement. Cited 4 American fighters, P-51 type, escorting bomber formation at 285 miles depth. Attempted standard attack profile. Mustangs engaged immediately with superior speed and maneuverability at altitude. Lost 2 aircraft. remaining fighters forced to break off. Bombers continued unmolested to coast. The pattern repeated across multiple raids. German fighters found themselves fighting not for kills, but for survival, against escorts that simply wouldn't leave. Oberst Johann Strautloft, a veteran fighter leader with 58 kills, noted in his December 1943 situation report, American fighter tactics have changed fundamentally. They are no longer constrained by range. We are now fighting on their terms, at times and places they choose. This represents a strategic crisis. His assessment would prove prophetic. German intelligence struggled to understand what they were facing. Initial reports estimated P-51 combat radius at 400 to 450 miles significant, but not catastrophic. German defensive doctrine could adapt. Pull fighters back from 4 bases. Concentrate attacks and maximum American range. But the estimates were wrong. The P-51's true combat radius of 750 miles meant no target in Germany was beyond escort range. Berlin, 580 miles from English bases, could be escorted all the way. General Major Joseph Schmid, chief of Luftwaffe intelligence, didn't believe his own analysts. In a January 1944 report, he wrote, "Claims of 750-mile combat radius are technically implausible. American fighters cannot carry sufficient fuel for such distances while maintaining combat performance. These estimates must be revised downward." He was wrong, and his skepticism cost German fighters dearly. By January 1944, the truth was undeniable. The P-51 wasn't just another escort fighter. It was a weapon that made the entire Reich vulnerable to daylight bombing with full fighter protection. The defensive strategy that had worked for 3 years was obsolete overnight. March 3, 1944, the day German fighter pilots had dreaded arrived. The 8th Air Force launched Mission 250, a daylight raid on Berlin, the heart of the Reich. 730 heavy bombers, escorted all the way by P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts equipped with extended-range tanks. For the first time, American fighters would fly over Berlin in force. German controllers watched the raid develop with growing disbelief. The bomber stream crossed the Dutch coast at 10:15 a.m., escorts still present. They crossed the Elbe River 450 miles deep, escorts still present. They reached Berlin at 11:42 a.m., 580 miles from England. The escorts were still there. Major Gunther Rall, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces with 275 kills, led a group from Jagdgeschwader 11 into the battle. His account, recorded in a 1988 interview, captured the shock. "We climbed to intercept, and the sky was full of American fighters, not turning back, not leaving, just there, overhead, below, everywhere. We were in our own capital, and we were outnumbered." The Luftwaffe launched approximately 500 fighters to defend Berlin that day. They faced over 800 American aircraft bombers and escorts combined, and the American fighters had enough fuel to fight. The results were catastrophic for Germany. 69 Luftwaffe fighters were shot down, 30 more damaged beyond repair. Against this, the 8th Air Force lost 69 bombers and 11 fighters, heavy but sustainable and far better than unescorted missions. More devastating than the numbers was the psychological impact. Oberfeldwebel Heinz Marquardt, a pilot with Jagdgeschwader 1, survived the Berlin mission but wrote in his diary that night, "Today I understood we have lost the war. Not lost a battle. Lost the war. American fighters over Berlin. Flying circles over the Reichstag. The radio propaganda says we are winning. But I watched American pilots wave at us as we fled. Wave. Like they own the sky. Because they do." The morale impact rippled through fighter units. Pilots who had fought confidently for years began showing signs of combat fatigue. Refusals to fly increased. Mysterious illness reports spiked. Some pilots simply didn't return from leave. Major Johann Steinhoff, a respected squadron commander, later recalled, "The P-51 broke something in us. Not immediately, but over weeks and months. Every mission, they were there, waiting. You couldn't avoid them. You couldn't outlast them. The feeling of being hunted in your own airspace, it destroys men." German fighter losses climbed relentlessly. In January 1944, before P-51s dominated escort duties, the Luftwaffe lost 261 fighters over the Reich. In February, 355 fighters lost. In March, 492 fighters lost. The attrition was unsustainable, but worse was coming. P-51 units didn't just escort, they hunted. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, developed aggressive tactics specifically for Mustang's range advantage. His standing order became legendary. "We're going to Berlin. We're going to stay at Berlin. And we're going to chase those bastards all over Germany until they run out of fuel or we shoot them down." The new doctrine was simple and devastating. Escorts would not stay rigidly with bombers. When German fighters appeared, P-51s would break off, engage, and chase German fighters back to their own airfields if necessary. The Mustang had fuel for extended combat. German fighters didn't. April 8, 1944. Brunswick Raid. Captain Don Gentile and Lieutenant John Godfrey, flying P-51s with the 4th Fighter Group, spotted a formation of Bf-109s taking off from an airfield near Gardelegen. Instead of maintaining bomber escort, they dove. Gentile's combat report described what followed. Followed 4 109s down to the deck. They thought they could outdistance us in a prolonged chase. At 450 miles per hour indicated, we stayed with them easily. First 109 I caught 75 miles from the bomber stream. Shot him down. Chased the others another 40 miles. Got 2 more. Godfrey got the 4th. Total pursuit distance, 115 miles from where we left the bombers. Returned to escort with 30 minutes of fuel remaining. This was the nightmare scenario for German pilots. American fighters could chase you across 3 provinces and still make it home. By April 1944, P-51 units began systematically attacking German airfields. The logic was brutal. If German fighters wouldn't come up, kill them on the ground. Major George Preddy, eventually the top P-51 ace in Europe, with 26.83 kills, led strafing attacks that destroyed dozens of aircraft. His philosophy, stated in a letter home in April 1944, "Better to destroy them on the ground than fight them in the air. They can't replace pilots as fast as they replace planes." The mathematics proved him right. From April through June 1944, 8th Air Force fighters destroyed approximately 800 German aircraft on the ground during strafing attacks, in addition to aerial victories. Lieutenant Heinz Bär, who survived multiple encounters with P-51s, wrote in his memoir, "They began attacking us during takeoff, during landing, on the ground. We moved our fighters into the forests. They found them. We dispersed to satellite fields. They followed. The P-51's range meant nowhere was safe. You couldn't hide from an enemy who could search for 3 hours and still fly home." By May 1944, the Luftwaffe faced a crisis worse than aircraft losses: pilot quality collapse. Experienced pilots died faster than they could train replacements. New pilots arrived at frontline units with 110 to 150 flight hours total, compared to 250-plus hours pre-war. They faced American pilots with 400-plus hours and combat experience. The results were predictable. Novice German pilots, thrown into combat against experienced Americans in superior aircraft, died in shocking numbers. Some lasted one mission. Some didn't survive their first contact. Oberleutnant Heinz Bär, the pilot shot by P-51 range in November 1943, watched his unit deteriorate through spring 1944. His June 1944 report stated, "New pilots arrive. I brief them. They fly one mission. They die. I brief the next batch. The Americans have fuel to practice tactics, to make mistakes and learn. Our pilots learn by dying. This is not attrition. This is slaughter." The kill ratios reflected the disparity. In June 1944, P-51 units achieved approximately 8-to-1 kill ratios over German fighters. Some elite squadrons reached 15-to-1. The Luftwaffe's defensive fighter force was being systematically destroyed. Adding to German desperation was a fuel crisis, partly caused by the very bombers P-51s escorted. American bombers targeted German synthetic fuel plants with increasing accuracy. Each raid reduced aviation fuel production, and the P-51's range meant fuel facilities anywhere in the Reich could be struck. By summer 1944, fuel shortages forced reductions in pilot training hours, creating less skilled pilots and limited operational sorties. German fighters often couldn't launch in strength, simply because they lacked fuel. Major Gerhard Barkern, Germany's second highest scoring ace with 301 kills, later reflected, "We had aircraft. We had pilots, though green. What we didn't have was fuel to train them properly or fly them operationally." Meanwhile, American pilots flew training missions over our territory. The P-51's efficiency meant they could afford to patrol for hours. We calculated every gallon. The strategic mathematics were crushing. June 6, 1944, Allied invasion of Normandy. The Luftwaffe managed just 319 sorties over the beaches against over 14,000 Allied sorties. German fighters attempting to reach the invasion fleet were intercepted by P-51s operating from English bases, providing umbrella cover across the entire invasion area. General Major Joseph Schmid, whose intelligence assessments had underestimated P-51 range, wrote in his post-D-Day analysis, "We face an opponent who can project fighter power anywhere in Western Europe at will. The P-51's operational radius exceeds our ability to defend our own territory. This represents complete air supremacy." German soldiers on the ground experienced the reality of lost air superiority firsthand. Obergefreiter Helmut Schmidt, infantry, wrote to his family in July 1944, "We see our own fighters perhaps once a week. American fighters are overhead constantly. The sound of their engines is unending. Even at night, we hear them. They own the sky. We exist only because they allow it." The long-range escort doctrine, enabled by P-51 range, had achieved its strategic objective, complete air superiority over Nazi-occupied Europe. But the human cost for German pilots was still accumulating. Through summer 1944, Germany's remaining veteran pilots fell one by one. Major Egon Meyer, credited with developing effective bomber attack tactics, killed by P-47s in March. Major Georg Peter Eder, shot down 3 times by American fighters, finally killed in April. Hauptmann Hans-Joachim Marseille's successor, Oberleutnant Emil Klade, shot down by P-51s in June. Each loss represented not just one pilot, but irreplaceable experience and tactical knowledge. Major Gunther Rahl survived the war but later reflected, "By mid-1944, we old hands felt like antiques. Every mission might be your last." The Americans had numbers, fuel, and the ability to choose when and where to fight. We could only react. And reaction in aerial combat usually means you've already lost. The psychological burden showed. Oberleutnant Heinz Nock, who had written confidently about German fighter tactics in 1943, wrote in August 1944, "I dream of the sound. The Merlin engine, that distinctive sound. Even on the ground, when I hear it overhead, my hands shake. Not fear of death, fear of powerlessness. You cannot win against an enemy who can chase you until your fuel runs out, who can wait above your field until you land, who can hunt you across your own country. We are prey, not hunters. The transformation was complete. German pilots, who once confidently attacked Allied bombers, now flew defensively, concerned primarily with survival. And still the P-51s came. Military historians debate whether the P-51's range was the decisive factor in achieving air superiority over Europe, or if other factors, numerical superiority, radar, pilot training, were equally important. Dr. Richard Hallion at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum argues the P-51's range was strategically decisive because it enabled escort tactics that forced the Luftwaffe into unsustainable attrition. However, Dr. James Holland counters that Allied numerical superiority and the destruction of German fuel production would have achieved air dominance regardless of any single aircraft type. The weapon's exact contribution to Allied victory remains actively debated among scholars. What's your perspective? Was the P-51's revolutionary range the decisive advantage, or was it simply one element among many Allied advantages? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What's certain is that the P-51 Mustang fundamentally transformed how escort missions were conducted and forced the Luftwaffe into tactical desperation. By September 1944, the Luftwaffe's day fighter force was a shadow of its former strength. Experienced pilots were dead or grounded. New pilots lasted days. Fuel shortages limited operations. Industrial capacity couldn't replace losses. And overhead, constantly, were the distinctive silhouettes of P-51 Mustangs. The aircraft German intelligence said couldn't reach Berlin. That physics supposedly prevented. That doctrine assumed impossible. Heinz Bär, the pilot who first encountered P-51's impossible range in November 1943, survived the war as one of Germany's highest-scoring aces with 220 kills. In a 1983 interview, recorded shortly before his death, he reflected on the Mustang's impact. That first encounter over Bremen, when I saw them still there at 320 miles, I knew something had changed fundamentally. Not tactically, strategically. For 3 years we owned depth. Bomber formations penetrated. Escorts turned back. We attacked. Simple. Effective. The P-51 destroyed that advantage overnight. By spring 1944, we were fighting over our own cities against an enemy who could patrol for hours. They had fuel to make mistakes. We didn't. They had fuel to practice new tactics. We didn't. They had fuel to chase us to our bases. We barely had fuel to reach the bombers. People say we lost because of numbers, or pilot quality, or fuel. Yes, all true. But the P-51's range made all of that worse. It let them bring the war to every corner of the Reich. It let them destroy our aircraft on the ground. It let them hunt our pilots during landing. I flew against Spitfires, Hurricanes, P-40s, P-47s. Good aircraft. Dangerous, but limited. The P-51 wasn't limited. And when you face an enemy with no restrictions while you're gasping for fuel, the outcome is inevitable. The statistics tell the story. From November 1943, when P-51s entered service, through May 1945, 8th Air Force fighters destroyed approximately 6,000 German aircraft in the air and 4,000 on the ground. P-51 units accounted for roughly 4,950 of the aerial victories and the majority of ground kills. German fighter pilot losses reached 70% casualty rates in some units. The Luftwaffe never recovered. The strategic bombing campaign that seemed impossible in October 1943 succeeded by May 1945. Allied bombers struck German industry, oil facilities, transportation networks, all protected by fighters that could escort them anywhere in the Reich. The P-51 Mustang went on to serve in Korea, with some nations flying it into the 1980s. Over 15,000 were built. It became arguably the most important fighter aircraft of World War II. But its legacy isn't just mechanical. It's strategic. The P-51 proved that range is a weapon, that the ability to project power across distance transforms tactics, strategy, and outcomes. That protecting your forces while striking the enemy's resources wins wars. In 1997, the Commemorative Air Force organized a reunion of American and German fighter pilots in San Antonio, Texas. Over 200 veterans attended. Oberst Johannes Trautloft, who in December 1943 had written that P-51 range represented a strategic crisis, addressed the gathering at age 85. For 2 years you chased us across our own country. We couldn't train, couldn't rest, couldn't hide. Some of us called you terrorists. Some called you cowards for not fighting fairly. But war isn't fair. And you proved something we refuse to accept, that technological advantage, properly applied, defeats courage and skill. My generation died believing spirit could overcome material, that will could defeat range, that our cause justified our tactics. We were wrong on all counts. The P-51 didn't just defeat us tactically, it exposed the foolishness of our ideology. That perhaps is its greatest legacy teaching. Those who survive that reality doesn't care about your beliefs. The lesson extends beyond World War II. In every subsequent conflict, military planners study range and endurance. How far can your forces project? How long can they sustain operations? The P-51 established that these questions often matter more than speed, firepower, or maneuverability. The aircraft that German intelligence said couldn't exist. That doctrine said, physics prevented. That pilots encountered with disbelief. It didn't win the war alone. No single weapon does. But it enabled victory by getting Allied forces unrestricted access to enemy territory with fighter protection. And that access, sustained over months, proved decisive. On November 26, 1943, Major Heinz Bär's world changed when silver fighters followed bombers deep into Germany and didn't turn back. By May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally. The P-51 Mustang was overhead,